What does it mean to live life to the fullest, train to your potential, and perform at your best?
Leave nothing on the table. That's a non-negotiable, is that I strive to be better every day. Because if I'm not on top of my game, how's anybody else going to follow me down the road?
Keep demanding more of yourself to live up to that potential and to stay hungry.
Training is progress. You know, when I look at the word training, I think of steps, baby steps to get somewhere that you want to be. And that is basically your life journey.
It's a mindset in itself, man. It's like, it's not just about, I know that for you, a lot of that's about the physical, but we're constantly in training, whether it's growing our skill sets, whether it's growing our physical bodies, whether it's growing our relationships, whatever. And all of that's a training ground. And that kind of goes back to the mindset that we just talked about.
You underestimate yourself and you don't even start. But then once you start, you often surpass what you thought you could do.
Perform at your best, mate. That's sort of what life is all about. You know, I want to have the knowledge, I want to have the fitness, the health, the ambition and drive that no matter what comes along, when that next phone call comes, I can just say yes. I don't have to worry. Just go and do it.
Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome to this episode of the Live, Train, Perform podcast. I'm your host, Sean Kober, and joining me today is Mark Direen, who spent over 2 decades in the Australian military, including 10 years as a Special Forces operator. Mark, welcome to the podcast, mate.
G'day, Sean. It's good to be here, mate. Pleasure.
It's good to see you, mate. It's been a couple of years. We met in Australia, in Hobart, at one of my Army Reserve units. You came in, gave a speech, had a chat to all the boys, and kind of talked about your experience going through the military, and as a Special Forces operator. And I know that a lot of the boys, that got their blood pumping and they're like, sweet, I'm going to go full time, I'm going to go Special Forces, blah, 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 blah. I was coming out the other side. I just, finished 6 years full-time service. And then I went into reserves for a period of time there. But that's where I met you, and we've kept in contact over the years. I'm really excited to have a chat to you today. You're the first SAS operator that I've had on, or former SAS operator that I've had on the podcast. I've had a commando. I've had some other ARA guys, Australian Regular Army guys. I've had British military, I've had US military, but yeah, it's an honour to have you on the podcast today, mate.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I think we've probably both come a fair way too since that talk. Down in Tassie.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a few years now.
6-7 years or something like that, but yeah, mate. The first question that I typically ask people is in regards to Swiss 8. So I'm not sure if you've been following this back home. Swiss 8 is a proactive mental health program that's designed by veterans, initially for veterans, but has been pushed out to the wider community to allow them to structure in 8 pillars of health and wellness via an app on their phone. I'm an ambassador for them. I really love what they're doing. I've used their principles myself going through that discharge process, and I'm sure this is something that we'll talk about as we go through today's session. But the pillars of health and wellness that they use are sleep, nutrition, time management, discipline, fitness, personal growth, mindfulness, and minimalism. Do any of those pillars stand out for you? And if so, what are they, and how do you apply them into your life?
Yeah, I've heard of the Swiss 8 guys. I've probably followed them now for a fair while. They've been around for a year or two. And have
in the public eye.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They've been working behind the scenes for a long time, man.
Yep.
Yeah. After one of the boys, Jesse Bird, unfortunately took his own life. You're a ex-1RR lad.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So it was actually started by ex-1RR lads. After one of them unfortunately took his own life a number of years ago. So yeah, they've been working behind the scenes for many, many years. But yeah, they've been in the public eye for the last year and a half or so. Sorry to cut you off there,
doing
mate.
a
Go
good
on.
job too, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't follow like a lot of points like that. I don't wake up in the morning and read those points and try and live through them throughout the day. I think in my younger days, like when I was in the military, I was probably too busy to think about it. Yeah, fitness was a massive part of my military career, I suppose, trying to keep up with the guys around me all the time. But I didn't think of fitness wasn't a hobby of mine or something like that. It was just something you did for work. I've kind of noticed now, as I've got older, I suppose, that my awareness of those things is a lot better. In my younger days, it didn't matter what I ate. Just as long as I put fuel in my body, it'd keep working. But now as I get older, I know if I eat junk food for a couple of days while I'm travelling or something, like I'll start to feel it big time. So I try to be better. I try to put better food in my body. The time management sort of one, I love it. I'm not a big time manager. I don't sort of sit down at the start of the week and I just prioritise things for me as they come along, and that's pretty much how my time management works. I'm good with sleep. I don't know whether it's the military career or it's just me as a person, but I can function really well with 6 hours a night, which is probably a bit less than the recommended, and then throw a sleep in there once a week. But the points that you bring up that the Swiss like to educate people on, the ones that really sort of resonate with me, I suppose, is the personal growth one. Once I sort of started finishing up my military career, and I was probably also coming to the end of that security contracting piece that I'd done in about 2015, I started to research a lot of personal growth stuff myself. And just through the study of it, I think I was actually then immersed in the process of it, understanding emotion better and mindfulness. And I had this massive amount, I had like nearly 20 years of experience behind me, unique experience with things like fear and fitness and performance and stuff like that, but I didn't have a lot of the theory. So learning the theory resonated with me with that growth part. I was able to piece my history together a bit, if you know what I mean.
That's interesting you say that, mate. It's something that I've noticed with myself, and it's come up, as I said, I've spoken to a number of military guys, ex-military guys on the podcast, and it's something that's come up numerous times is, when you are in the military, you're constantly growing, you're constantly learning, you're constantly taking courses and then applying those lessons, and then, you're drilling certain skills. You're drilling them over and over and over again. You don't get to progress until you get those fundamentals right. And you're taking these leadership courses. You're surrounded by amazing leaders. You're put in these different positions where you're constantly forced to adapt, constantly forced to be flexible, constantly forced to grow. And then once you get out of the military, then you don't have that structure anymore. And I think that's where a lot of guys lose that, because it's all about that professional growth. Like, you want to be like, I'm sure as a SAS cat, man, you want to be the best fucking operator that you can be, because you want to contribute to the team. You don't want to be a liability. You don't want to be the dude that's dragging ass and holding everyone back, man. So you're doing whatever's necessary to be at your best.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to survive. You want to be an asset to the team, but ultimately, you're no good to anyone if you're injured. You want to survive. So, but those early days in the military, there was not really that personal investiture in your growth, because you were too busy growing. Exactly like you said, you were just put on courses, you were sent to do training. So the growth was huge.
That's
young,
the
young guys
professional
after
growth.
A couple of years in the military. They're phenomenally educated and trained people. But it's, as you just said, once you get out of the military, you're no longer forced to continue growing. That's when you need to be able to transition to make it a personal part of your life. The personal growth in that fitness space, or the knowledge space, education space, training, and continue to have great experiences in life now comes down to you. So I kind of did that well around 2016. I took ownership, I suppose, of my own personal growth and kept reading and doing things, kept getting new experiences.
That word, man, that word right there, ownership, is so fucking important, not just for ex-military personnel that have gone through that transition, are no longer being, belt-fed, forced to learn, forced to grow, forced to develop. Like, now you're taking ownership for your own life and, seeking out these answers. It's really cool, man, because when you're doing all these courses, you're learning, you're growing, you're adapting, you're being super flexible, but you're also applying these skills. Like, you don't really notice what's happening at the time. You're just along for the ride. And then when you get out, you go through your own journey, you're putting your own processes in place, you're figuring out your own path, direction you want to go. You look back and you go, man, I'm actually really fucking grateful for a lot of those lessons that the military taught me. Is there anything that stands out for you that you learnt from your time in the military that you have now applied into your current life?
Oh, heaps. Everything.
Yeah.
All the soft skills. And you can name hundreds of them, whether it's that tenacity to keep going when things are hard, or it's the leadership, teamwork, work ethic, time management, as you mentioned a minute ago. All those soft skills that I learned in the military, I try to still use every one of them today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have as much need anymore from IAs and stoppages on a belt-fed machine gun. So some of the hard skills have dropped away. Not all of them. Endurance, marching, and things like that, I still use in my daily job. But it's the big one that stands out that I got from the military are the soft skills. And I think it's the ones that people forget to promote in their character too, once they get out of the military.
That's a great point. Obviously, you spent quite some time in the military, which is very structured, very regimented, has their way of doing things. You become, you adapt to that culture. You adapt to that social environment. And I think, I only spent 6 years full time in the military. I covered 3 deployments in that time. I kind of got in at a good time where, I hit the trifecta. So that was a great time for me. But even just that 6 years, man, those 6 years of full-time service have had like an everlasting effect on my character and the person that I am. A lot of people, when they do discharge from the services, they throw away all of those soft skills and the hard skills. They stop doing the things that made them good soldiers because now they don't have to. Now they don't have to get out of bed at the same time. They don't have to shave every day. They don't have to, focus on their dress and bearing and attention to detail and all that sort of stuff. Was there a period of time where you threw all that shit away, or did you find it fairly easy to transition those skills back into the civilian world?
I wouldn't say I threw them away. I mean, I've been through some traumatic experiences in my life, so I've certainly firsthand experienced post-traumatic stress, I suppose. So at some of those occasions, you might have one too many beers on at some time, or you might just be a little bit depressed on the odd occasion. Being able to recognise that and picking yourself up the next day type thing is I suppose, the thing that I actively went out and sort of learnt myself to be able to recognise, and then to be able to continue to go forward and do good things and great stuff, continue to lead an interesting life.
We're probably going to circle right back to this part of the conversation. But what I want to go into next is your military career. So talk to my audience about when you joined, how long you spent at the battalion for, why you decided to apply for Special Forces, and then we'll kind of pick up the conversation from there.
Yeah, well, I sort of grew up in Tassie, and for me, I don't think when I was young I had this mad desire to join the military. Some big influences, I suppose. Early in my life, Dad was a truck driver and I liked motorbikes and cars, and so while I was in high school I read a few military books, and I actually did Army Cadets in a couple of high school years. I didn't think I'd ever join the military. I actually tried to become a motor mechanic as I was leaving school. Pretty much grade 10 I was tired of school and I wanted to get a job, so I thought I'd go out and get an apprenticeship. And unemployment was not good in Tassie, so the trying to get a job part went on for a fair while, about 12 months or a bit longer. And eventually my mum said to me, why don't you enjoy the army? You enjoyed your army cadets. Why don't you go and get an army apprenticeship? And so that's what led me into recruiting. I sort of thought to myself, I don't know why I haven't thought of that before. So went into recruiting and applied for an army apprenticeship. The funny story, I think, with it is that I actually got one. So, half a dozen trips to recruiting, you're doing aptitude testing and mechanical aptitude testing, and then you're doing interviews, and eventually I got a letter saying you've been accepted to apprenticeship school and come in for an interview. And in the midst of handshakes from the recruiting officer, I sort of informed him that I'd changed my mind and I wanted to be an infantryman. So he kicked me out of his office, and I went away for a bit longer, and then joined back up as an infantryman. Went off to Kapooka.
Yeah, and that
instead of Bonagilla. So
was that 96, 97?
That was 93, 92.
Holy shit!
92, I went to join. 93, I eventually joined the army.
92, mate. I was 7 years old, man.
No, I was loving it. I think it was like I talk about some of the lessons I've learned in life, and that was still to this day one of the biggest ones, where I had this moment of clarity where I thought, you know what, I probably should get a job. Everyone was telling me, go get an apprenticeship because it'll be a skill you'll have your whole life. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I just went, I'd rather do this other thing though. I'm just going to go and do the thing that I want to do, mm-hmm. and not the thing that I should do. Mm. And because even 17-year-old me, just because I don't want to be old and have this regret that I never tried this infantry thing that I was interested in. It probably wasn't I didn't consider the challenge of going to war on operations when I was young, but what mm-hmm. I was interested in the challenge of was the hardship in life. It was probably out of the Vietnam mm-hmm. novels that I was reading, where guys are carrying heavy packs up mountains and living in the jungle and the rain, and it was the hardship mm-hmm. that I thought would be challenging in the infantry. So that's kind of why I went mm-hmm. and did it. And yeah, as you said, Kapooka, Singo, and off to 1RR in Townsville. Yeah,
that's a great reflection, mate, because I was actually going to ask what made you decide to turn down the mechanic apprenticeship and and join the infantry. Because there's definitely something to what you just said there about guys wanting to challenge themselves and seeing, the fucking hardship that these dudes are going through and going, you know what, I want to be involved in that. Yeah. Like you got to have like a little bit of a, like your mental chip needs to be a little bit different to want to go, you know what, I want to put myself in these situations. I want to fucking test myself. And I'm sure that just grew as you went through your military career. Obviously you ended up like going for selection, making it through, and, we'll go into that. But there's definitely something different about guys that decide they want to test themselves.
As a 17-year-old, I absolutely wasn't thoughtful enough to think that the reason I want to do it is because it will make me a better person, which I 100% believe now. The more hardship you can face, the mentally stronger you'll get, and everything. And you also don't want to suffer either. Like there wasn't this part of me that just wanted to go and suffer in the army doing hard things, but it was just the challenge. I suppose it's probably, you would know better than me, it's maybe not too different to a sportsman who, sets high goals for themselves, I suppose. Yeah, you wanted to challenge and you wanted to see if you could handle it, how good you could be.
Yeah, man, that's interesting you bring that up. That just sparked a thought for me is, I did a post on social media about this, probably like a year ago, maybe. And I was talking about, how society these days, and this is controversial, and this will probably piss some people off, but society for the most part is pretty fucking weak, man. Back in the day, we lived in these tribes and we would have like a rite of passage. And, the weak didn't survive, the strong survived and passed on their genes. And you'd have a rite of passage where you had to prove yourself to be accepted by the tribe. you know, and these days, like, we live in this soft society where, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's certain skills that are lacking and people are getting softer and people don't know how to deal with adversity. You know, so many people are really struggling with, you know, this last year going through the pandemic because of XYZ. And I understand that. However, if you look back in history, man, like, this is the safest time to be alive in human history. Yet the way that people are acting and responding and fucking carrying on, it's like this, it's, you know, the world's falling apart. So I really think there's something special to, as you said, doing something that's going to challenge you, that's going to test you. And for males in particular, it is like that rite of passage. All right, I'm going to fucking sign up. I'm going to join the military. I'm going to test myself. I'm going to put myself in a competitive alpha male type environment. I'm going to see where I fucking stand.
Yeah, I said it a moment ago, I'm a big believer that growth comes from when you're outside your comfort zone. Life for us in Western societies is comfortable. I'm not a big money person. I don't chase money. And without that as a drama, we don't have a lot of survival issues. I'm a big believer. I'm a big fan of quote by Bruce Lee, don't pray for an easy life, pray for the strength to be able to endure a difficult one. Because if you are able to endure a difficult life, when you finally get to the end of it, whenever that might be, you'll be a better person than you otherwise would have been if you just, you know, everything was handed to you on a platter from start to finish. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant, man. I want to piggyback off that as well and add my favorite quote, which is, the greatest gift that you can give someone else is the ability to deal with adversity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Good.
Yeah, I love that, man. All right, cool. So you went through your Kapuka, basic soldiers training, then transitioned into IET's initial employment training, Singleton, which is the School of Infantry, and then got posted to the Battalion 1RAR. Where was 1RAR? Was that in Sydney at the time? Was that
no, in Townsville? In Townsville. The battalion had sort of come back. It was the end of '93, start of '94. That Christmas period, I sort of arrived up there. So the battalion had come back from Somalia. You know, us soldiers, we love our operations. It kind of would have been nice to have got there a year earlier, but that actually doesn't take away that it was a phenomenal time to get to 1RAR. I got to a battalion that was full of operational experienced soldiers. So, you know, I think arguably couldn't have had a better introduction and training. I was surrounded by phenomenal mentors to teach me how to be a soldier, you know, to start getting that experience post your training. It was a phenomenal time to get there. So, yeah, Charlie Company 8 Platoon, spent a couple of years there. They just introduced, I think, around the Somalia era, the second Minimi to the sections. So I got the number 2 Minimi and got told to go down the back of the section and...
That's a machine gun, light machine gun for people listening.
Told to go down the back of the section.
There's a number of people that listen. There's coaches. There's you know, some of my clients. There's people from all over the world listening, man. So I'll try and speak layman's terms for them as well. Now, just for the audience, Somalia was an interesting one. We were there as peacekeepers, essentially, with the UN. Is that correct?
I believe so. It was didn't go, but it was American-led operation, UN sanctioned, and they were there to assist with delivering of aid and a lot of things. You know, there was huge starvation problem in the country at the time.
Yeah, and just to give a little bit of context for the listeners, Somalia was kind of a weird one because, you know, a lot of the local militia were, you know, fucking hacking people to death and basically taking over these aid posts and, you know, keeping all the food and stores and everything for themselves. And like the greater population were fucking dying in the streets, man. And, you know, there was all this crazy stuff going on, and the Australians were there as peacekeepers, and, you know, they were seeing like people being hacked to death in the fucking streets with machetes, but couldn't do anything. Like, their rules of engagement dictated they weren't allowed to fire, they weren't allowed to use force, and, you know, that caused a lot of issues for a lot of those guys coming back as well, right?
Yeah, possibly. I haven't seen a lot of that. I haven't seen a lot of those guys having issues, I suppose. When I arrived at the battalion, as I was saying, it was a pretty professional infantry, light infantry, air mobile sort of battalion, and they were still pretty focused on their soldiering. It was impressive.
That's also another good point is like I spoke to the Swiss 8 boys probably like 6 weeks, 2 months ago. And I read some research recently where, you know, a lot of guys don't really have issues, and then around about that 10-year mark after they got out or after that event, that's when signs of PTSD and anxiety and depression and things like that start creeping in, man. So I can imagine those guys have just come back from a deployment. As you said, man, they're young dudes, right? They're young guys. They're fucking excited. They're Australian soldiers. They're being deployed to, you know, do their job, go on a peacekeeping mission. But then, you know, getting back to Australia, they're like, all right, well, that was what it was. They didn't really give it any thought. All right, let's train up for the next deployment. Let's train up for the next thing. Purpose. Let's keep growing.
They still had a lot of purpose.
Exactly.
So that probably helped. Exactly.
I think that's where a lot of the issues start coming in, is where, you know, years down the track where guys don't have that purpose, and they are sitting with their thoughts a little bit more. They're not focusing on that personal, professional growth. That's when issues start creeping in. So from there, mate, you spent a number of years in the battalion and then decided you want to give Special Forces a crack. Talk to me about that decision and that process, and then we'll go through some of the greatest challenges through the training process.
Well, after I finished as that section gunner, I went up a little bit in seniority. I became the lead scout for the section. And then that led me to do a recon course, go from working in 10 and 30-man teams down to 5-man teams. And after I spent 12 months in the recon platoon working in smaller teams, I then moved to the sniper section. So just working now in pairs at the end of my time in the battalion. I look back and I don't think I had this mad desire like some people have to go and do Special Forces selection. For me, it was more of a natural progression. Everyone that I worked with, all my peers, a lot of the mentors that I had done the selection. Some had been selected to become operators and stayed, and some had come back. So I just again saw it as that, well, I might give this a crack, I suppose. You know, I might go give this challenge a go, see if I'm up to it, and basically see how I get on. I was infantrymen, as you know, like pretty fit little creatures anyway, so I kind of did the training program they gave me and went off to Western Australia for the selection course.
So you never had like a mad desire to become a operator? It was just it's interesting you say that, man, because I kind of had a very similar journey. Much later, 2006, I joined, went to Iraq, was the lead scout of my section, went over to recon, was doing OJTs, and then did my snipers course, went to East Timor, went to Afghanistan. And, you know, I've got a number of mates that are, you know, in commandos, in SAS, and they're like, why didn't you go SF? And I was like, well, one, I achieved everything that I wanted to in my military career. You know, as a sniper, like, you're one of the best soldiers in the battalion. And that next progression is to go Special Forces. You know, so I totally understand where you're coming from there, man. Let's talk about that process. How difficult was it to go through that training? Because the reason I ask this is because, you know, as you said, it wasn't like a mad desire for you. You've got some guys that join with their whole intent of going Special Forces. Like, that was my intent when I joined. I was like, I'm going to go to the battalion. I'll spend a couple of years there, hopefully go on a couple of deployments, get my knowledge, experience, skills, and then apply Special Forces. And then I got to that crossroads and I was like, I've kind of achieved everything that I've wanted to. You know, so I'll go down this path, I'll discharge. But, you know, when you're making that decision and you're like, you know, this is the next progression, some guys are just hell-bent, man, and they're going to do whatever is fucking necessary to make it in. Whereas you're just like, I'm not hell-bent on this. However, it is the next progression, so I'll give it a crack. How do you think that mindset affected your ability to perform in the training leading up to that, but also on the selection course?
Yeah, I was pretty driven. Don't get me wrong. But it came probably out of curiosity a lot more than anything else. The training for selection I didn't find difficult. I'd done 40 and 50 clicker pack marches in the battalion. I'd done recon courses. You're spending days in the field with heavy packs walking. So the training program, I just followed the training program that the SAS recommended. Here's what we recommend you do. So for me, I identified a few areas that I was probably a bit weaker than others. I wasn't a great swimmer, even though I'd grown up in the water around Tassie. So I hit the pool and practiced my swimming. I worked hard. There's a few, actual skill-based things that they recommend you come to the course. One for my course was Morse code. So I was practicing the hell out of stuff like that. I just did as much as time would allow me to do and prepared myself as well as I could. Once I got on the course, the curiosity of seeing what it's about at the other end and, what's behind, what is all this stuff that you won't tell us about? I'm interested to see what it is. And I'm pretty stubborn too when you're going to have people on the course telling you that you're not performing. So I'm able to get over that, I suppose, with relative ease, where I'm able to shut that out and not let it affect my performance too much. I had to you do a lot of testing. There's quite a few things that you do have to pass, like a 20-kilometre pack march online you had to do in 3 hours 15. I passed most. There was a 3.2 run in battle order with the rifle and combat sort of equipment. They were always hard, so I trained for those a lot. I wasn't always a fast runner. An interesting thing for those that run, when I first did selection, the Army was 97. The Army had just gone from a 5K basic fitness test to a 2.4. And so the Army said this is what the pass mark, this is what the pass time is for this 2.4 run. But the SAS wanted to have a higher standard, basically, but they didn't know what they should set that standard at. So on my course, they set the standard, 9 minutes. You have to pass this 2.4 run in 9 minutes.
2.4 kilometres?
Yep.
Holy fuck. That is flying, man.
I wasn't too bad. Like in training, I could get an 8:45 pretty regularly, but obviously on the day, you're getting tested. It's now day 3, day 4. You've been working pretty hard for a few days. The first run I did, I literally crossed the line at 9 minutes and 1 second. So I failed the BFA and had to do a retest the next day and scrape through. Yeah.
Fuck. That's crazy, man. I think my best ever time was like 8:20 or something for a BFA, and I was always around about that 9 mark. But I was relatively fresh, hadn't been hammered for a couple of days beforehand.
Yeah. That's 8:20's fast. You just did your best. Like I was on the course, all the physical stuff, I just did my best. Probably the hardest stuff I found on the course was the sleep deprivation and the lack of food. So you're still you're still working pretty hard for 3 weeks, and then they stop feeding you towards the end. You start to get pretty lethargic then. Yeah.
Something I want to talk about is mental resilience. So you mentioned earlier that you found that you were okay because selection is quite well known for, in my circles, for people berating you and just telling you you're not good enough, you're a piece of shit, you're never going to make it. And that fucking breaks people, man. That can break people. But then you've got guys like yourself that was just like, whatever, water off a duck's back. Like, where did that mindset come from? How did you build that mental resilience to not let other people's opinions and words affect you, even though you were tired, even though you were being beaten down, even though, you were fucking being put through the ringer?
Yeah, there's sort of 2 big areas there where they will give you that negative feedback to try and make you fail. And even having gone back as an instructor a couple of times, I often found that negative feedback would yes, it might demotivate people sometimes, but it actually not as often made people quit. More often it would motivate people. The harder one I found was the no feedback. When someone did something and they're either looking for, have I done a good job, have I done a bad job, and you give them nothing. That was the thing I found, that then the conversation started in their own head that they're not doing well.
Start planting those seeds.
Yeah. I was also pretty good with my own head. Like, it might have been because it hadn't been this lifelong dream of mine to get there. I was just there for the experience and out of curiosity to see if I was good enough. So in my own head, I just kept doing the best I could do. So I think if you're not doing your best, that's when that negative self-talk can start to eat you up. But if you are and you know in your own mind, I'm giving this everything I've got, my best effort, then I stayed pretty comfortable with what I was doing. I made mistakes on selection course. I remember one night I sat down for a rest on an AVEX, and I had to get a night checkpoint. I literally sat down for a rest, and I was that tired I just fell asleep on the ground, pack on my back and everything still. And I woke up a couple of hours later, but I'd eaten up time, and so that night I never got awarded a night checkpoint. The next day, and the next night, I just had to work, 10 times harder to make up for the error that I'd made. So I think for me on selection, just gave it my best, I suppose. And I think if I had have failed it, if I had have got booted off, or I had have got to the end and they didn't want me, I wouldn't have gone home with regret, because I would have gone, well, I wasn't up to the standard, probably.
Yeah, that's a great mindset. And something you said there that really makes me think that, that's something that served you, having that mindset, was, you said that you sat down to have a rest, you fell asleep for a couple of hours, you missed that checkpoint, and then that made you go, you know what, I need to fucking bust my ass the next day to make up for that, because you're not pointing the finger of blame at anyone else. You're not saying, well, they're not feeding us, they're not letting us sleep, they're not blah, 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 like the work rate's too high. You're like, I fucking made a mistake. I need to fix this. How can I make up for that? I think that's an important component of psychology, man, that is the difference between, people who thrive and people who crumble under pressure when it comes to facing adversity.
Yeah, in that example, they'd set a standard. On that particular day, I didn't meet their standard. And I just knew that I had to lift my effort and work rate up to the standard that was required. Unfortunately, at the end of the course, that one day where I didn't meet the standard wasn't the pass or fail for me. It could have been.
Yep.
And if your mistake was made somewhere else, that didn't. If I hadn't have got if I had made the mistake again, if I hadn't have got the checkpoints the next day, or it was impossible to get 2 checkpoints in one night, because most people just got 1 checkpoint per night, I had to get 2 the next night. If it was physically impossible for a human to do that, I wouldn't have passed. So they set the standard. The metaphor, I suppose, is that person that wins the silver medal. If they can look back on their preparation for the race, and it is as good as they can do, and they've given the actual event everything they've got, and they get a silver medal, I mean, they probably won't regret it. They'll probably be happy that they got that far. Whereas they just weren't good enough to beat the gold medalist on the day. So it comes back to that regret piece a bit again.
That's thought-provoking, because, a lot of people will train. Let's use the Olympics as an example. So many people, it's a 4-year cycle. So, some people only ever make 1 Olympics. Some freak athletes go to 4 Olympics, which is crazy, man. But, if you only ever make one Olympics and you're training your entire life and you go and you compete in an event and you get a silver medal, you know, your mind can play tricks on you, or it can, your mind's either going to serve you or sabotage you. I've seen and read stories on people that have won a silver medal and like always regretted it and like, oh, well, if I had have done this and I had done that and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, dude, you're like the fucking second best in the world. You know, it's about reframing that and going, as you said, I gave it my best. Went through my best preparation. I gave it my best shot on the day. Yeah, there were circumstances that maybe didn't line up, that maybe lined up for the other person, but that was the end result on the day. I need to accept that, you know, and be happy with that. Whereas other people let that chew them out, man. And they live that life of what if and regret and looking back. Maybe I could have done this different. Maybe I could have done that different.
And you got to be realistic. Like if you're standing on that silver medal spot and all you can think of are all the times you went out on the piss when you should have been training, well, there's probably room for a little bit of self-reflection.
Yeah.
But if you've given it your best, then you certainly need to put it into perspective.
Yeah, 100%. All right, cool. So let's start wrapping up the selection course and move into being posted to the unit. Prior to that, though, what was the most difficult thing on the selection course?
I'd never been so fatigued. Like, by the time you're getting to the end of that 3 weeks, I actually heard, I'll call it a rumour, but you know, from pretty good sources, that they cut the course I did. They cut short from their actual finish time that they were going to have by about, 4 hours or something, because the participants started collapsing. And so the doctor went up to the chief instructor and said, hey, are you happy with the guys you've got that are here now? And the chief instructor sort of went, yeah, like there's not a bad bunch of guys. And he goes, well, if you run the course to your end time, another 4 hours from now, you'll only have half of them left. So they,
oh man,
my good fortune and the other guys that were with me, they cut the course short by 4 hours, which is probably nothing over 3 weeks. But like that fatigue where people just start dropping around you, they're just literally passing out. No food and work, no sleep.
Yeah, massive output, minimal input with sleep, nutrition, hydration, blah, blah, blah. That's crazy, man. I've got some mates that have gone over west and east, and they were talking about their courses and, saying like how much fucking damage they did to their body, on that 3 week course that they were dealing with like years later. One guy was like, my knees were fucked. Like, and they haven't been the same ever since. One guy was like, I couldn't feel my feet for 6 months. Like, just shit like that, man. So it's like, it's everlasting changes that do happen to people because you are under massive amounts of stress.
Yeah, and you got to have your mindset squared away to finish it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's talk about transitioning into being posted to the unit, because once you're at the unit, it's not you're good to go. Like, you're constantly, I heard someone say it's a daily renewable contract.
Oh, from finishing selection, you've got a long way to go. So you haven't even signed the contract yet. Once you finish selection, you've been selected that they consider you trainable. So for me, it was about 12 months maybe, training cycle where then they start to teach you all the skills that they want you to have. Even though I've been
the selection courses, like as you said, it's
the interview.
We consider you. Yeah, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I love that. Yeah, I know some guys that I was in the unit with that went to selection, passed everything, got to the end of selection course, and then didn't get accepted. Man, like that must have.
We had two
fucking kill you, bro.
2 on my course that finished but didn't get selected. Yeah, but the course is there to see what you're made of. And then from there you do what we call the reinforcement cycle, which is all the courses. So I trained as a medic for a patrol. They do medic and SIG courses. you do demolitions and you do urban fighting and hostage rescue and unarmed combat, heavy weapons. You do I did driving courses. Some people specialise as free fallers and divers. I specialised in vehicle mounted operations, so I did that. You do a lot of courses for a fair while. And you eventually get to the end of all that. I even did, I'd been a sniper in the battalion, as I said, but they put me on some more advanced sniping courses, which were really good. And then at the end of my reinforcement cycle, once I'd passed all those courses, that's right through 98, we're now starting to January 99 or whatever it was, but the regiment was looking at going to do the domestic counter-terrorism piece for the Olympic Games. And because I had the sniper skills and they had a shortage of snipers in the unit that was going to the Olympic Games, I got posted there and spent a couple of years doing the counter-terrorism piece in Australia.
That would have been a cool job, man.
Yeah, super interesting.
Just for the audience, Mark just spoke about the many different courses that he had to do, and this is quite typical in the military, is, you know, especially in the special forces community, is like you need to be well versed in all of these fucking areas because you could be fighting land, sea, air, right? Like those are your different insertion platforms. Those are the different things that you need to be looking at. You need to be able to apply all of your skills in multiple different environments. And then once you do all of those courses, you've got a base level across the board. Then you typically specialize. Is that correct?
Yeah, some of the courses, they'll tell you at the start of it, hey, this is going to be a specialty of yours. Mm-hmm. For me, it was the medical one. So you do a basic course and then you'll do continuation training while you're in the unit to keep those skills up.
How are you selected for those courses? Do you get to apply for them, or do they see that you've got like a talent for becoming a medic, or for sniping, or being a demolitions expert, or whatever it might be? Like, how does that come about?
A bit of all of the above. When you're a new soldier there, there'll be a bit of influence. For me, the sniping piece was because I had sniping background already. Mm-hmm. I think I became a medic because I was rubbish at Morse code. And so they went, oh, you can go be a medic. I mean, languages is a classic. You'll do language aptitude testing. And depending on how people do on their aptitude testing will then depend on which language they send them to do. Some of the other skills, demolitions, for example, like everyone does demolitions. And then it might just be how your career progresses over the next few years as to whether they want you to be a demolitions instructor or something like that. So, yeah, it's just some of it is sometimes time and place. Other reasons will be you wanted to pursue that. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're really good at something. Sometimes they're looking at career progressions. And sometimes they're just like, we need to fill some spots.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, cool, man. Now, you deployed a number of times. We won't go into too much detail here. You did get injured on one of your deployments. Can you talk to me about, and you don't have to go into too much detail here, but share as much as you feel comfortable. What was your injury? How did it occur? And what were the circumstances leading up to that? And then from there, we'll transition into how you dealt with that injury and what occurred after that.
I'm happy to talk about it. For me, post that sort of 2000 period where I spent a lot of time in Sydney, did a deployment to Timor, and then I did a 2002 deployment to Afghanistan. And then coming back from that, I actually considered discharging from the military. I thought I'd had a pretty reasonable career. I achieved the goals that I wanted to do, and I took long service leave and spent.
That was roughly 10 years under your belt by that stage?
Yeah, I'd been in about 10 years, probably a little bit longer. And while I was on that long service leave, I kind of just came to the decision point that, no, actually, this is who I am and what I want to do, and my mates are still fighting and I want to go back. So that was the getting blown up by the IED you're talking about was in 2007. I kind of thought that I knew at the time what I was getting myself into, and I've got a bit of experience behind me, I suppose, as a young digger. I've been to Afghanistan already, I certainly didn't know in that early 2002 what it was like to fight in that full-blown conflict, so to speak. Because there's been a few skirmishes earlier, but
that was just kind of kicking off then, and it was fairly, Australians were like only just entered into the global war on terror, so to speak, and it was still kind of new, right? And that 2002 deployment would have been completely
2006,
different.
Yeah, 2002 we chased a few bad guys around. We chased a few criminals around. We took a few wrong turns and drove through minefields. A lot of our taskings then was more to do with strategic long-range reconnaissance for my unit, for the mobility guys that I was working with. So we spent a lot of time in the field talking to locals and sending reports back into sort of the coalition system.
Gotcha. Whereas, just pause there for a sec. The minefields that you drove through, were they planted by the Taliban, or was Russian. This? Yeah, is it leftover from the Russians, from the from the Soviets? Okay.
Yeah, I talk to people sometimes about evolving mindset when you're immersed in an environment. So towards the end of that 2002 trip, because of being so comfortable with risk, I suppose, because there was a lot of risk with minefields then. Just driving around the country, we were going to places we hadn't been to a lot, and there were leftover Russian minefields everywhere. Towards the end of that trip, I would walk into minefields to go to the toilet and not be harassed by the locals, to get some peace and quiet, basically. And that's kind of the getting comfortable with risk, I suppose, which you've got to be careful of.
Yeah. There's a difference between becoming comfortable with risk and just being fucking complacent.
Yeah, accepting risk because you have to get the job done, and
that's something that we'll probably transition to. But sorry, continue on. Like, what happened from there? Then you.
So 2007 was a lot different. We were operating now just in Uruzgan province, and we were fighting bad guys basically who were trying to take over and take charge. Right at the end of the trip, we'd been operating. We're actually heading. It was our last task, and we were heading back to TK after we'd finished it. And on the return trip back to TK, we were crossing over some mountain passes, and we damaged a few vehicles. After we'd damaged those vehicles, we were sort of static on the top of a mountain trying to get them fixed, and I knew that we had to drive back down through a valley before we got to some open country, which was more favourable to vehicles.
More options, you're not being channelled.
Yeah, we were being channelled, and I was actually heavily concerned that we could get ambushed and they could put IEDs in the road. And so I said to the boss, the troop commander who was in charge, I'm of the opinion, let's not just wait on the top of this hill till we got these cars fixed. I'll take my patrol and we'll punch forward, clear some of the ground. The boss said to me, I don't want you getting too far ahead though, so once you get to this location, I'll get you to stop there. So I drove forward with my patrol, had a couple of cars, and we had some quad bikes with us actually. Drove forward to the point where the troop commander had said, don't go any further than that, and we stopped there. Mm-hmm. While we were waiting there, a guy came walking out on the road towards us in front of us. So it's a really narrow valley. Maybe it's, 50, 100 metres wide with a dirt track in the middle of it and a bit of a creek line on one side with some high ground around. And as it ran away from us for a couple of 100 metres, the valley sort of turned to the left and went off into dead ground where you couldn't see. Mm-hmm. And so this guy, 150 metres away, he came walking up the road towards us out of the dead ground. And I can still remember to this day that moment when you're watching someone and then the
hair on the back of your neck sits
I saw
up.
The moment when he spotted us, and it's like you're walking on your kids and catch them doing the wrong thing. He had that look of surprise on his face,
deer in the headlights,
and real concern. I actually remember him and he was carrying a big box, like a big cardboard box or something. And so he sort of sat the box down on the ground, and he sort of got down like he was trying to do his shoes up, which was odd because they very rarely wear shoes with shoelaces. They're all slip-on shoes. And I could kind of just tell that, he didn't expect us to be there. He'd been sprung. He was now trying to think of what to do. And he picked his box up and sort of did a left turn and started walking away from us, but off the road now. Changed his mind and changed his direction. I think in hindsight, I probably thought about just shooting the guy. Like, in my mind, I was that certain that he was dodgy. But he wasn't, I couldn't identify a weapon. He was carrying a box with him. So I turned to the driver and I said, let's drive down there and apprehend that guy. We'll go get him so we can question him and, work out what's going on. The driver started the car up and we went to roll forward, or we did roll forward, maybe 30 centimetres, and we'd been parked on top of the IED, so
shit.
Yeah, it just went off.
Fuck.
When I tell people about the story, like the thing that I remember most vividly, which a lot of people in those high threat moments, when you think you're about to die, remember that time slowing down. Like, I can really remember time slowing down. I can actually recall the dust coming up and literally engulfing the dirt from the road after the bomb went off. And because we had open cut vehicles, I can remember getting ejected out of the LRPV, the big 6-wheeled patrol vehicle. So I was now flying through the air, looking back at the car, and this 7-ton combat vehicle now a couple of metres off the ground. I can see it off the ground. So eventually I just landed and tumbled down the creek line and came to a stop. I was probably about, 20 metres from the car. So I was like, I'd flown a long way through the air. And I thought to myself, that this could be the start of an ambush. They could have positions in the hills. I need a weapon to defend myself. So I looked at the car to where my rifle was normally sitting beside my seat. And my rifle had come out and was lying on the ground, and the car had come back down and bounced and landed, and the fuel cells had been ruptured. There's a couple hundred litres of aircraft fuel leaking out of the car. I went to get up to go and get my rifle, and I couldn't stand up. I kind of couldn't feel my legs. And so then I basically got my pistol out of my holster, got my pistol. It had blown out of my holster. I sort of dragged it in on its lanyard and sat there and waited for the excitement to start. And by this stage, my team members behind me had started to put out security, and a medic had come and got me to see if I was alive. And from there was no ongoing ambush after that. They medevaced me out though.
Probably because you sprung them and they didn't have a chance to get into position to lay a complex ambush. Yeah, and that's the possibility. I mean, I've had people say to me in the past, why didn't you have the sniffer dog on the road? We had a sniffer dog with us that day, Raz. And yeah, arguably, maybe I should have made that decision to have that dog. But then potentially the fact that we got into location so quickly, maybe we were inside their decision-making process and we defeated them setting up a complex ambush. Unfortunately for Raz, the detection dog, and his handler, so there was another IED in the road a bit further down, and the dog got killed finding the next IED. But myself and the driver got casevaced out, and no one got killed that day. So the rest of the troop got back, but delayed a bit. Mm-hmm. And then what happened? You ended up getting sent back home there. You had some fairly serious damage to your spine.
Yeah, so I compressed some facet joints in my vertebrae in my lower back around the lumbar region. But the thing that was most memorable for a long time afterwards was the damage that the shockwave of the explosives did. So from my neck to my ankles, I was like purple, and massive swelling initially right through my whole body. So the reason I couldn't walk to begin with was because of the swelling in my body, and the swelling around my spine was, compressing my spinal cord. So that only took a couple of days to go down. I could sort of then limp around, and after the bruising started to go away, so you're sort of talking, 4 to 6 weeks or so, I then just started getting back into it, I suppose, back onto the horse. I was in the gym and working with physios and doctors to get going again so I could get back to work.
Mm-hmm. Are you still affected by that occasion and that damage that was done in that IED explosion?
Physically, I carry injuries from my military career. I've got a pretty stiff back. I gave a stiff neck. Is it from that, or is it from parachuting? Is it just from carrying a pack?
An accumulation of things.
20 years.
Yeah.
It's hard to attribute to one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, getting blown up by an IED in a road's not good for you. I can tell you that much.
I don't doubt that, bro.
But as you know, an infantry career I ended up doing 18 years in the military, or thereabouts. It's hard on your body. I take my hat off to some of my peers who are still in. They're hitting 25, 30 years now. Like, that's an impressive amount of time.
Wow.
I'm sure they don't train like they did 15 years ago, but
yeah.
it takes. I've got injuries.
Focus on recovery, I'm sure.
Yeah, that job just takes its toll on your body.
Yeah, man. Now, I believe you were involved in a very famous circumstance where Mark Donaldson was awarded the Victoria Cross. Is that correct?
No,
you weren't.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, fuck.
No.
My mistake.
No, I wasn't there then.
My mistake.
In actual fact, that incident where I got blown up, we were returning from the area where Dono won his VC, and a swag of guys got medals because they did a phenomenal job to stay alive. It was about 8-10 months later, I think, they went back up to the same area we'd just been.
The Badlands, huh?
Yeah.
Now, you did a number of deployments after that.
Yeah, I went back 3 more times.
Is there any significant events that happened that you're willing to talk about that occurred on those deployments where guys were just fucking doing their job, stand-up dudes that were highly awarded or had a significant impact on that deployment or that operation?
Yeah, I don't talk about medals too much. I think everyone that I ever knew that got awarded medals for their war service absolutely 100% deserve them. From my experience, I think they probably could have awarded a few more because the amount of guys that went above and beyond what would be considered their duty, I suppose, and went unnoticed, still humble today. Like, that's the thing that's a humbling. I believe those guys. I think my last deployment was affected me is not the right word. Was memorable for me because it was so different. I'd seen such a change from 2002 on my first deployment to Afghanistan to 2013 when I was on my last military deployment to Afghanistan. Like the actual, living and existing in the environments that we needed to do our job was hard enough, let alone catching bad guys and trying to defeat an enemy there. We were fighting on a daily basis. For me, I never personally fought in any big battles or anything like that. A skirmish, I suppose, is a good way to describe it. Probably hundreds. A lot of skirmishes. And some of those ones in that last trip, we were trying to catch the enemy hierarchy, so we were finding where they were and we were flying out and landing on them. So it led to some interesting times. I was also, on my last trip, working with the Afghan partnering force. So it was interesting to go out and get in gunfights with guys that you couldn't talk to. That you're
training and mentoring, because, I mean, that's what my job was over there, was to, I was part of the Omelette teams, the operational mental liaison team that we're training the Afghani National Army security forces to essentially be able to take control of their own country and provide their own security for their own people.
And I found that hugely rewarding.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Now, you said that you weren't involved in like any massive battles or anything like that, but I guarantee that like your role played had a significant impact on changing tactics, strategies, providing information, reconnaissance, intelligence to, other bigger operations, because I mean that's a lot of what special forces do, is like fly under the radar, gather intelligence, paint a picture essentially, so that, you know, larger ground forces can roll in and, you know, fucking take the fight to the enemy. And I'm sure that your roles changed over time.
Well, the modern battlefield, I mean, ideally no one's ever going to be involved in a huge battle, are they? Like, true. If we can shape and change the environment, I saw like that last trip is a classic. It was my job to shape and change the environment to make it better for the Afghans, to train the Afghans military to make the areas where the Afghan civilians live better without getting myself and my colleagues killed. That was pretty hard to do when you're fighting an enemy who's willing to die for what they believe in. You know, arguably that was a huge success to not be involved in any major battles, to always pick the timing of the choosing to try and stay ahead of the bad guys and control your environment, so to speak. I often have people say to me, you know, what are your highs and lows type thing of your time in the military. For me, they sometimes morph together a bit, because those times that I look back on as some of the biggest highs were surviving some of those days that were just the hardest days, that were the biggest lows. One of them was on that last trip. We flew out from TK into the field to catch a bad guy. Supposedly we thought there was going to be an enemy commander there. And when we landed on the ground, I was with my Afghan partnering force, and I was way off on the right-hand side of the army unit that I was with. There wasn't a heap of us, probably about 30 of us, I suppose, had got off the helicopters to go and try and catch this bad guy. And on way down on the left flank, a bit of a skirmish broke out. So one of the teams down there had a bit of a shootout with a couple of bad guys. Went for a minute or two and then died out. Once we then cleared through and were searching for the guy we'd come to get, one of my Afghan team members came and got me and sort of grabbed me by the shirt and tried to drag me away with him. And I went with him. He was, you know, a guy that I trusted. He obviously needed me somewhere else, so I went with him. But started to get concerned. So after I'd sort of been taken 600 metres off to the north of the team, the rest of the 30 guys, I was like literally starting to go, where are we going? He eventually took me into a compound.
Can I trust this dude?
I kind of trusted him as a person, but I didn't maybe trust his judgment. Maybe he's like taking me the wrong way because he thinks it's the right way. But we eventually got to this compound, and when, you know, he went inside, I thought, what's in here? I went inside, and then I could see there was a few other of my Afghan teammates in there, so they cleared the compound basically, and I'm like, oh, rightio, what do you want to show me? I'm now thinking maybe he's got a big enemy cache of weapons or something like that, and he points into a small little room in the corner of a mud compound, and it only looked like a small room, and as I ducked down and went in the door into the room, I could see it was like a wood storage room, and lying in the corner was a young boy, and he only looked, to me, he was probably in his early teens or so. And then as I took that second look, he had an arterial bleed to his leg. So straight away, as you sort of jump into action basically and try and stop the bleed and save the guy's life, I knew straight away that he wasn't an enemy fighter. He was just a civilian that had been caught possibly in the contact earlier in the crossfire. And it hadn't been too long ago either, otherwise he'd be dead, because his bleed was that bad. So he's got this mad femoral arterial bleed, which I'm stuffing and, you know, administering first aid, to save his life. So that day didn't finish there. We moved off a bit further and got into another contact with some more bad guys. We actually lost one of our tack dogs that day, which was terrible. The guys, his handler and the guys with him were lucky to survive, lucky not to get hit by the bad guys. But, you know, that dog again saved their life. I look back on that as, you know, it's one of those times in combats, you second guess, did you do the right thing all the time? Could you have done a better job? So you spend time, you know, evaluating your own performance. The dog got killed. You saw civilians get wounded. Like, that was a really a really hard day. But I also look on that day as a high point for me. One, I didn't get killed, and two, we saved the life of a civilian.
You had an effect
and
on.
we got some bad guys. It was also a high. There were lots of days like that, I suppose, and you remember them.
Mm. I love how you just framed that about, some of the biggest highs came off the back of the biggest lows. Yeah, I love that you can put that perspective on it and be able to reframe that in your mind. From there, let's talk about the transition process. So you obviously did a number of deployments. You spent almost 2 decades in the military. Then you transitioned. What was the biggest challenge of transitioning from the military after so long and getting back into... Well, I'll let you discuss where you want to go from here.
I do get this question a lot, especially these days, and it's a hot topic. How can we make service personnel, how can we make their transition better? And I honestly say to people, look, I'm just the worst example of this there is, because pretty unique circumstance, I suppose. So as I said before, I was going to transition way back in 2005 to 2006, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. I couldn't. I was like, no, this is who I am. I'm going to be a soldier for the rest of my life. So, I botched my first transition potentially. I then actually, after I got blown up and after the next deployment, so after my third Afghan deployment, I discharged from the regular army. My back wasn't as good as it was prior to getting blown up. I was like struggling a little bit with fitness, and in my mind I just went, I'm not the teammate that these guys are going to want anymore. I'm not going to be able to keep up. I'm going to be a liability to the team. So I had kind of that thought in the back of my mind a little bit. And also my kids, I was living in Perth, working in the army, of course, and my kids had gone back to Tasmania, and I couldn't see them coming back to Perth. So I sort of thought, if I'm going to be a father and see my kids at all, and coupled with this back injury, I think it's time for me to get out. So I discharged from the regular army in 2009. I then went and worked in Afghanistan as a security contractor with mates of mine that I used to be in the army with. So even though I wasn't in the army anymore, it was an environment that was similar to the good things about contracting were the same as the good things about being in the military. You're in a job that can give you, it's challenging. There's some adrenaline there. If things don't go well, you're working with your mates.
You're still carrying.
There's lots of similarities. So I love that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Then going back to the army, getting back in again on full-time contracts for another 3 years, and then eventually getting out again in 2014, going back doing more contracting. By the time I got to around 2015, I absolutely wasn't tired of the military. I loved it, and I still love the experience that I had today. A lot of fond memories from it. But I was happy that I'd finished, I suppose, my time in the army. So around that 2015 mark, I left. I stayed in reserves for a little while, went back and did, helped on a few training courses and bits and pieces, but I was pretty much done with my military experience. I think one of the major things that also helped me to be able to make the cut was, yes, I got out of the military, but I didn't get away from my friends. So I still have constant, regular contact, literally daily in some instances, with my mates that I was in the military with. Mm-hmm. So still get their advice on stuff, and where we can. It's been a bit hard the last 18 months. We'll get together at, we'll all fly to Brisbane to go and have a few beers together, like we still catch up. That's been a pivotal part to it as well.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's super important because, again, so many dudes just get out and they don't really know where they're going. They don't really know what they're doing. Maybe they meet a girl and they start a relationship, and I know so many mates that this happened to. It happened to me as well, man, where you meet someone and you spend a lot of time with them. You're going through that transition process, and you kind of lose contact with your mates, and you lose that purpose, you lose that self-identity, you lose that tribe, and it is very easy to kind of lose your way a little bit. But yeah, I love those points that you just made there about keeping in contact with the boys and catching up. And
it's almost bigger than that. Like you just said, that people feel like they lose their tribe. I will say to people, like, no, you haven't lost your tribe. Like, you're one of us. Whether you call it, a veteran or whatever you call it, it doesn't even have to be a veteran. There's people in my tribe that aren't veterans either, but they're just those like-minded people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your environment and the people around you is very important. And again, man, so many dudes just kind of like drop off the radar a little bit and they lose that contact.
The worst thing you can do, I think, is cut away from everyone.
Let's talk about how you transition your skills from your time in the military to then what you decided to do with your life, with your career, with your work, etc.
Yes, while I was still doing the security contracting in Afghanistan, so a lot of that was fly in, fly out work. You do 2 months on, month off or something along those lines, 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. On my time off, I was living in Tasmania to be with my kids, spend time with my kids, and I thought, well, what can I do in my spare time? I might start a little business, basically, where I take people bushwalking down in Tasmania. So I did that as pretty much a hobby business, and we'd do a few bushwalks a year with a few clients here and there. Once I was ready to finish the contracting part, I thought to myself, I might go all in on this hiking business. So I did that, pretty quickly learning that, you know what, I'm not a mad businessman. In actual fact, if I evaluate my little business as well, I'm going to come to the conclusion that as a bushwalking guide, I can't compete with the professional bushwalking guiding companies. Their marketing budgets, cost effectiveness of how the business runs and things like that. As a little one-man band, I can't beat them at their game. So then I evolved my business to be, I suppose, probably more true to what I am and what I want to do, and at the same time providing a different experience. And so that's what I did. I'll openly say, hey, look, if you just want to go for a walk across the overland track in Tassie, and that's the goal, then you're going to go with one of the trekking companies that just does that.
Yep.
If you want to go and have a life experience, an adventure that you're going to learn from and be a better person at the other end of it, not just someone that now has some photos of the overland track, but someone who's going to achieve more in life, you're going to come and do the trek with me, because a lot of the topics and conversations that you have on your podcasts are what I take on my experiences. And that's what I did. I took all, the skills that I'd learned in the military, risk mitigation and all the hard skills, survival and all that type of stuff, how to
navigation.
Navigation and how to live and survive in difficult environments, put that in my new job. And then I actually took some of the skills that I learnt doing diplomatic protection, so how to take care of a client, not how to take care of them so that you just get them from A to B, but how to teach them how to take care of themselves as well. Looking after people skills and the military skills that I have. And so now not only take people trekking in Tasmania, but we'll lead expeditions around the world, and as well as taking people just for an adventure experience that they can grow through and be a better person at the other end. Will do trips with clients that have a purpose towards their trips. So I've taken university researchers overseas to remote locations. I've worked with energy companies. I've worked with adventure travelers, and now, like on this podcast, and in the last 12 months, I suppose, just started myself delving more into social media and YouTube and things like that. that's been great for a few reasons. One, it's good for business to tell people that you're in business, and two, it's hugely challenging for me because I just had a 20-year career where you weren't allowed to tell anyone you existed. So then to do a podcast like this, I actually find quite challenging.
Yeah, I remember talking to you in Hobart one day. I think we went for coffee, and I was talking to you about what was happening, and I think you were kind of going through that transition period from going, private security into your hobby job in quotation marks, and you were talking about, hey, I want to start this. I want to, get people to get helicoptered into a certain location, get dropped off. All right, let's figure out where we are. Let's bring out a map and a compass. Let's go some map to ground. Let's look at reference points. Let's look at features. Let's figure out where we are. Then this is where our checkpoint is. Let's go for a hike through the wilderness. Let's make our way down to this river where there's going to be some canoes waiting for us. Then we're going to canoe down the or kayak down the, down the river to another checkpoint. That's where we're going to make, that's where we're going to make our camp for the night. We're going to search for food and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, man, that sounds fucking sick. Is that kind of, like an overview of what you ended up doing? Or I'm sure it changed over time.
So the big difference from some of those early thoughts that I had, some of those early ideas that I had, was that there would have been a certain amount of script to that.
Gotcha.
Whereas some of the stuff that I actually run now, it's unscripted. It's getting the balance right between, having a goal and going for the goal, but not, having to literally navigate from A to B. So, for example, I did a hike with a client across Israel. And so our goal was to walk across Israel. We were going to start at the most northern point and finish at the most southern point. Like, it's a pretty big undertaking. It's over 1,000 kilometres, and there's a lot of logistics problems to solve between point A and point B. But we solved them as we did it. And so then I know the person I hiked with had a phenomenal experience. I had a phenomenal experience. Just doing the problem solving and things that happened along the way, and how we got from A to B in a sort of 5-week time frame.
An adaptable and flexible process.
Well, yeah, I'll never forget it. Yeah. Like, and I've had some great experiences in my life and some memorable experiences, and I now will try and show people how to do that. I've got another client who I took on a few trips to Cambodia and Vietnam, and she kind of doesn't get me to take her away anymore. I trained her up enough that she's happy to travel to locations that are not too high risk by herself. And I like you. There's a lot of personal satisfaction out in that. Like, it's that's phenomenal. That it's not just come and I'll take you somewhere so you can get your Instagram pic. It's
man, you've taught us some fucking life skills.
You'll be a better person at the end of it.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Yeah. Mate, just to start winding up the episode, the last question that I ask all of my guests is the following. The name of the podcast is Live, Train, Perform, and that stands for Live Life to the Fullest, Train to Your Potential, and Perform at Your Best. What does that mantra mean to you?
Ooh. Live life to the fullest, I suppose, for me, is like right back to that 17-year-old kid who was like, should I be a motor mechanic or can I run around the bush and shoot guns? You've got one shot at life. Who knows how long it's going to be? Whatever stage you get to the end of it, like having the least amount of regrets is living life to the fullest, I think. So that if you seize those opportunities or moments, or build those opportunities and moments so that you can do things in your life that are memorable, like that to me is living life to the fullest. Even to the next phase, I suppose, is to doing something greater than just yourself. If when you die, other people are talking about you in a good way once you're gone, that's life lived to the fullest. Potential, I would reframe the term potential. I'm not a big fan of live life to your potential, because your potential is endless. It's not defined. The more you can study and the more knowledge you can acquire and the more you can learn, and hard skills, the more you can train to improve them, the better off you're going to be. The more experience, like I'm a big fan of gathering experiences, as you know. So the more experience you can gain in life, where does your potential end? It's only going to end where you want it to end. And perform at your best, I suppose, is the best way to do it, is to go back to those Swiss 8 points that you had. You know, if you're putting nutrition into your body and you're getting some sleep and you're doing some training and you spend a little bit of time on your mindset and you're philosophical and you're trying to understand who you are and what you are and your purpose and your passion and you're building, you know, a bit of tenacity into yourself, like you're going to perform at your best, I suppose. So, yeah, I'd go back to those Swiss 8 points that you had. They were good.
Love that, mate. Hey, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you very much for sharing your story, your experience. All of your links I'll have in the show notes. So if anyone's interested in reaching out to Mark and, you know, maybe booking a tour with Point Assist, then get onto that. Could be life-changing. Mark, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, brother.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again and to be here. I'm trying to do more of this. I'm actually getting into a bit of public speaking now because I love sharing experiences and talking to people like yourself. So, yeah, Point Assist, you can find me. Yeah, look me up, send me a message.
Love it, mate. Thank you very much, bro.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure you share it with your friends and family. Give us a tag on the social media. Any 5-star ratings and reviews are much appreciated. Much love, guys. Peace.